So without further ado, today we're going to talk about asparagus. That's right. I know usually I do weird fruits and vegetables, stuff that sometimes you've never seen before, but this one has its story. It's a very strange vegetable. It was originally in the lily family, along with the alliums like leeks and onions and things. But actually, it's now in its own Asparagaceae family. So it is a monocot, kind of like bananas or grasses, where when the little leaves, the first cotyledons come up above the ground, there's just one sticking out instead of two. So, so that's asparagus. It's actually in ancient times was called sparrowgrass, and when it wasn't cultivated long ago. It actually grow along sort of brackish water areas that can handle really salty soil. So the spears were very small, and over time it was developed to grow these thicker, more beautiful, delicious spears like this. So this actually, they're not really sure, people aren't really sure exactly where this came from, but there are wild forms of it that still grow in Africa and the Middle East and in Egypt. So they're guessing that's about probably where asparagus originated, or sparrowgrass originated. And then around the 1200s or so, this actually found its way to Europe, and where it was actually start to be developed into longer and thicker varieties that were more sort of toothsome. This used to be food for royalty when they were able to actually develop it to grow this way. So let me show you what this looks like when it's an adult. So this is also asparagus. As you can see, here's the bottom. And then we sometimes call these asparagus ferns because they have kind of a fern-like habit, but actually these are stems that photosynthesize in order for the plant to grow, to create starch and to create fiber. So the reason that that asparagus is so expensive is because normally it's just growing in one season of the year. Now we have a global food system, so this is no longer a seasonal vegetable. But normally in the Northern Hemisphere, this is only available in spring. So like March to mid-May in most climates, that's when this vegetable is available. So this is a vegetable that's primarily, I would suggest, for homeowners, kind of like an apple tree. It's something you have to wait a few years to start harvesting from. And if you're renting somewhere for a couple of years and you spend all your money, spend a bunch of money putting in a bunch of asparagus crowns, you may move out by the time you're actually able to harvest from them. So the plant actually comes straight out of the ground looking like this. And every day during the spring, if you have a developed asparagus bed, you go out and you clip these off. And then you can either cook them right away, which I recommend, because asparagus continues to keep developing and growing and maturing even after you cut it. So when you first cut it out of the ground, right up at the base of the stem, it will be sweet and tender and lovely. But especially if you buy it at the grocery store when it's not refrigerated, more chance that you're going to end up with a woody and chewy product, because the sugars in here continue to convert into fiber, a rare fiber called lignin, which is actually good for our digestive system, but with too much of it developed in here, it can be really stringy. So the best way to store asparagus is when you bring it home, cut the bottoms off and put it in a little dish of water like this, and even better, cover it with a plastic bag and put a rubber band around it, or just tie it. And this reduces the amount of oxygen that's in here, and it keeps it cold. And then change the water every day or two, but really you'll want to eat the vegetable within a few days for peak freshness. But this will give it a little bit more time, especially if you buy a lot of it. Or you can buy it frozen. A lot of times frozen vegetables sometimes can be fresher than fresh vegetables because they're frozen at the peak of ripeness and freshness. So that's also another good option. You can also find it marinated, they call it, and it's actually like pickled in vinegar with spices, and that's a really lovely way to have it. You can also find two other varieties. So you can find green asparagus, sometimes you can find white asparagus and purple asparagus. So white asparagus is blanched. It's actually green or purple asparagus that as it's growing, the farm workers pile sand up over the growing stem and it keeps it from photosynthesizing. And so it's a bright white stalk. I tried very hard to find fresh white asparagus for you so that I could compare the two, but I couldn't find any because it's not in season in our hemisphere. And white asparagus is actually the most popular asparagus in Europe, especially France and in the UK. So a lot of the stock ends up going there. It is not as popular in the US as green asparagus is. If you want to know if your white asparagus is fresh, it should be bright white over the entire stem. If you get a stem of white asparagus and it's green on the tip, it shows that it's been sitting under the store lights for a little while. So because it's having availability of light, so it actually starts to photosynthesize and create chlorophyll. So if there are like purple or green tips on your white asparagus, you know that that's been sitting there for a little while. And again, I don't recommend buying asparagus if it's not in refrigeration, unless it's the spring and you're at a farmer's market and they've got it sitting in a tray of water. That's absolutely fine to buy it that way, because chances are your farmer has harvested it that morning before they've brought it to the market. And you'll get it, you know, if it's in this hemisphere, you're going to have that available between March and mid-May here in the Piedmont. Although since it's pretty warm here, you'll get random asparagus spears coming up throughout the year and you can trim those. But really, if you're going to plant asparagus, you should plant it, you can either start it with seeds if you want to, or you can buy crowns, which is sort of like the root structure. It looks like a tiny octopus or something that you can plant in the ground. And then you want to let it make fronds or ferns for 3 years before you start harvesting it. Because if you harvest every single one that comes out of the ground, it doesn't have time to create this photosynthetic frond that's going to actually enlarge the roots in the ground so that they can create more and more asparagus. So that's why, you know, if you get one of these guys in, if you get a whole row of these in, they're really beautiful because they create kind of a screen. This is a really wonderful landscape plant. It's ornamental and gorgeous. You can, if you're doing edible landscaping, you can put this sort of as a border somewhere and then put lower plants in front of it. And it's just a nice background border that looks really gorgeous. It can also be like a privacy border as well. But you let this grow and just cut it down in the fall. It'll kind of die back in the fall and you just hit it with a weed whacker and knock it all down. And the stems will come up again in the spring. But do that for 2 or 3 years. And then you can harvest every year for 20 years. It will feed you, sometimes even longer actually. So there's a couple of different things to know if you're going to grow asparagus, is that there are male and female plants. So these plants are dioecious, which means that there needs to be male and female flowers on different plants in order to create seeds. Whereas there are other plants that are like self-pollinating. They have male and female flowers on the same plant. This one does not. So you can tell that this is a female plant because it is forming berries. So anytime that you see these little berries forming, they'll actually become bigger and red when it's time for them to you know, when they're ripe and they have seeds in there. The female plants are not necessarily preferred because there's a couple different reasons. The plant puts a lot of energy into making seeds. And so that results in much thinner spears and fewer spears. So there's a lot of cultivars out there that you can get that are just male plants. Another reason that people tend to not really like the female plants is because the seeds will drop on the ground and overcrowd the bed, often putting off more and more female plants. It's a crapshoot whether or not you're going to get male or female plants out of the seeds. So it's just something to keep in mind if you're going to start these and establish an asparagus bed. In permaculture, this would sort of be like an outer zone vegetable. So this isn't something that you would grow right up next to your house. Since it's a perennial, which means it comes back year after year after year, this is going to be like where you would put your fruit trees and things, because this doesn't require much maintenance once it's established. So whereas if you in your kitchen garden, you might have your annuals closer to your house, like your broccoli, cauliflower, herbs. You're going to have your, you know, lettuces and tomatoes. Those are going to be closer to your house because you're going to be keeping an eye on them. And, you know, there's going to be a constant turnover in your beds of different kinds of crops throughout the season. But something like a fruit tree or a perennial like this, it can actually be a little bit further away from your house. And then you can just go out in the spring every morning with your cup of coffee and harvest all of the new stems that have come up above the ground. So that's asparagus. Oh, one other thing I wanted to talk about that I think is really interesting about asparagus, and some of you that have had this vegetable before will know this, that it can tend to make your urine smell real bad. So sorry to gross you out, but it is part of digestion. It gives you stinky pee when you eat it. Now, there's sort of an argument and a lot of studies done on whether, because some people did not experience that odor when they would use the restroom after eating asparagus. And there were studies to try to figure out, is it just that they don't make the chemical because of their genetics, or is it that they can't smell it? And so there were, you know, a few smaller studies in different countries that supported one theory or another. And it wasn't until 23andMe, these modern, you know, at-home DNA tests, that discovered that people who cannot smell the stinky urine after eating this actually have a change in their olfactory nerves. So somebody that can smell it even on you, even if you can't smell it. So something to keep in mind. Little gross, but the chemical actually that causes that is called methyl mercaptan, also called methane thiol. So there are a lot of sulfur-containing chemicals in asparagus, and when our body processes these, the resulting smell is methyl mercaptan. And some people can smell it, and some people can't. So, and it doesn't matter what kind of asparagus you eat, it's gonna create that chemical in your body. So don't be shocked, especially if it's your first time eating asparagus. Sometimes this happens and it's okay. It's perfectly healthy, it's perfectly fine. One other thing I thought was kind of funny is that Rutgers University has a lot of proprietary varieties of asparagus that they've developed through their Ag Research Center. And I was reading the types, and I've actually planted these in my yard, and it's there's one called Jersey Giant, Jersey Knight, Jersey King, and I didn't know those were proprietary varieties, which means that you can't cultivate them yourself since somebody else has already sort of trademarked them in a way. And so, well, without their permission anyway. And I've planted these crowns in my yard, and it made me think, you know, Jersey, they say that everything's bigger in Texas, but I would have to disagree, because there's Jersey Giant asparagus that were developed in New Jersey. There are Jersey Giant chickens that were developed in New Jersey, and they're huge chickens. I have some in my backyard. They lay big brown eggs. They're super sweet, like nice chickens, but they're a dual purpose breed. So if you want to grow some for eggs and then some for meat, they're like a 10-pound chicken. They're a huge chicken. They dwarf all the other chickens in our flock, and they're really nice, and they don't tend to try to fly over the fence and stuff like that. But then also Jersey cows, which actually that's from Europe, that's the old kind of cow, actually has the most milk fat of a cow. So getting like Jersey butter is really wonderful, because it's about 5 or 6% butter fat. It's much higher than whole milk is from another, like a Holstein cow or something like that. A Holstein cow was selected for a large amount of milk production, whereas a Jersey cow, those cows, they create a smaller amount of milk with a much higher fat percentage. So it's just interesting to me that Jersey apparently means big when it comes to agricultural products in some way or another. I have one other fun thing to show you today, the chili of the week. So this is an aji mango, and aji means chili in South America, primarily Peruvian cuisine. So if you see Aji Amarillo, Aji Ivory, all of these different ones, in the Caribbean, they also call chilies ajis. So this is a really fruity type, delicious pepper. It's pretty hot. It is about 50,000 Scoville units, which is probably, if a jalapeno is about 5,000 or 6,000, this is 10 times hotter than that. So the heat of 10 jalapenos basically. But again, the heat always does vary depending on whether or not it was grown in a certain kind of soil, or whether the plant was under a large amount of stress. So you could have two identical jalapeno plants, one that was grown in a totally different land with no stress, and then another one that was grown with a lot of stress. And the stressed one is gonna create more capsicum in that pepper. So even though they're the same species of pepper and the same, even grown from the same seed packet, it just depends on the terroir, the land that it grows in, and its environment. It's sort of like an epigenetic effect. Its environment influences what genes are expressed, and that happens for us and pretty much all living things. So so this is the Aji Mango Pepper. I can't eat these like a lot of people can. Like I can put this in like a big thing of stew and it's beautiful, but in Peruvian cuisine, often this will be chopped up and served on the side, sort of like a condiment, mixed with garlic and red onion. But ajis are very popular. The I think most popular one besides this one in the garden right now is the Aji Amarillo, or the lemon drop, and it's a really spicy, really fruity aji pepper. You'll also see these if you want to buy the seeds to these. You'll also see some long, thin ones that, and those taste the same. They're the same species, but they just have kind of a different shape when they grow. But yeah, so these ones have white seeds. They're open pollinated, so you could actually save the seed from this and grow, this exact same pepper. So yeah, enjoy spicy food. So why don't I go ahead and open it up for some questions. You can ask about anything you want about food, ask.
So the first question I have, I've wondered this every week with the peppers. I have had the experience before of chopping peppers and then having the oil on my fingers and it burning on my hands or on my face, or I touch myself, and you just touching those peppers like it's nobody's business. So what am I doing wrong?
Well, what it is I haven't broken the skin on this pepper. So you can pick peppers and you might get a little bit of that capsaicin here, but it's when you break this open and you touch the seeds, but primarily the ribs on the inside. The ribs really do carry a lot of capsicum. So as a rule, especially if I don't know if something is spicy or not, I'm gonna put gloves on. Also, because you know me, I'm not just making 6 jalapeno poppers for my husband. I'll make 200 and then freeze, because when you grow them, if you're not buying them and you're growing them, it's like they all come at the same time. So I'll slip some gloves on, and when you have gloves on, and this is really valuable in COVID, if you have gloves on, you don't touch your face. Like it's just, you won't touch your face. You won't have the stuff on there that causes problems, the capsicum. And especially like if you get a spicy pepper, it gets down in your nails, in this sort of nail bed here, and it's really painful. So wear gloves, that's what I recommend. But then also if you forget, or a pepper ends up being spicier than you thought it was gonna be and it's burning you, the capsicum is oil-based. So it does not wash off with water. So what I do, and I've done this before, is take like some cooking oil of some kind, butter or lard works really great too, because it's a saturated fat, and just rub it all down in there, rub it, and that's gonna pick up some of the oil, and then you can wash it away with soap. Do that a few times, and it also dilutes the capsicum in any location that it's in, because it can pick it up. It's also soothing too, especially if you messed yourself up with a spicy pepper. So that's why whenever I'm gonna test the spiciness of a pepper, now I know what these are, so I won't test these. But if, for instance, in our garden right now, we have a bunch of banana peppers growing, and I don't know if they're spicy or I don't know if they're sweet. So what I'll do is I'll take it and I'll bite the pepper right at the top, right here, where the seeds are, and just bite it like and then touch my tongue to my teeth and see if it's spicy. Because I know with those banana peppers, there's just not that, because you could bite off the end of a pepper and that's the least area it's gonna be spicy. It's the ribs and the seeds, primarily the ribs that carry all of that.
That's really good information. Thank you. So I think we'll move to a question that's not mine. Um, so, isn't it bad to eat really hot peppers? Are these people who eat these hot peppers hurting their bodies?
That is an excellent question. So I don't know if you're asking about this, if the person who's asking this has seen Chili Klaus online and all of the fun things that he does with chilies, and getting people to eat chilies. So this can't kill you, but man, not this particular one, definitely not, but capsicum in large amounts can cause like, if you have like underlying health conditions and you just decide to go and eat a Reaper, which is the hottest pepper in the world that we talked about a few weeks ago, it can cause you terrible hiccups. If you have like heart problems, it can make you feel like you're having a heart attack. I don't know that there's anybody on record that's ever died from eating a chili, but I'm telling you, something with this many Scoville units, or like a habanero that's slightly hotter than this, or a Reaper, or a 7-Pop bubble gum, or one of those that are like a super hot, it's spicy twice. You're gonna feel it on the way in and you're gonna feel it on the way out. And so that's why I don't like spicy food that much. Like I like spice, but I don't want it where like I'm sleeping and I wake up and I can feel my stomach like burning. Because we have taste buds in our mouth, but we also have not really taste buds, but we have nerves that go, we have as many nerves on our digestive system as we do on our brain. So those nerves are there not only to feel, but kind of taste what's going on in our digestive system to notify our, other parts of our digestive system, like, oh, I need a little bit of, bile to digest this fat, and I need a little bit of this, that, or the other. And so if you're torturing yourself all the way down, it can be really uncomfortable. I don't know that anybody's died from it, and really people can develop a spicier taste. So a lot of times children, when they grow up, this happens a lot with people who live in like Asia or Africa, and they come to the US for school. They've grown up eating their mama's spicy food their whole life, and then they come here for a couple of years, and then they go back to visit and they can't eat the curry or whatever their mama made, and the mom's like, what's wrong with you? And it's because they haven't had, that sort of nerve response, like, that what you're used to. And so you can build it back up. I mean, I'm even going through it when I go back to Arizona and I go in, my favorite Mexican restaurant and eat the salsa that I used to eat all the time. The first day that I get back, it's so spicy, I'm crying, but then I eat it like every day that I'm there. And because I can kind of make the salsa, but it's never as good as like that. It's something about like those grandmother's hands that like make that salsa. And I just cry, but by the end of the week, I can totally handle it. So you can actually build up a tolerance to these things. And if it's something that interests you, you can come see me at Briggs and pick one of each of the peppers and work your way up over time. Even if you want to dry them, all peppers are great for drying. So you can make your own powders with them or drinks or whatever. They're great for gifts at Christmas if you know people that like spicy things. So yeah, you can't die. You're not hurting yourself, but it does hurt you. For those of you who haven't watched it, Chili Klaus does a symphony where he's a conductor and everybody eats a spicy pepper and they play this piece of music. It's a tango and you can feel the pain in the music. It's amazing. Anyway, if you haven't seen it, I've talked about it before, but I love it. It's kind of joyful and interesting. I feel bad for them, but like they're adults and they ate it. So yeah.
So I think related to the question I asked, a question about hints for cutting or chopping onions without tears.
Okay, so that's a great question. I love that question. Okay, so what I often do when I'm cooking with other people, I refrigerate the onions first so they're nice and cold. Like when we teach knife skills classes and stuff, we cut the onion last so that, when they're crying, they're not trying to cry through other things. What that burning is actually the sulfur-containing chemicals in the onion that are good for your heart and your digestive system and all of that. But when they effervesce off of the onion, they mix with the water in your eye, they create basically hydrogen sulfide, which is sulfuric acid, a very weak sulfuric acid. And so it burns your eyes. It's literally burning your eyes. So what you can do is a pair of goggles works great. If you've got a pair of swimming goggles, pop those bad boys on and you're good. Refrigerate your onions. That's going to make them less volatile when you cut them. Another thing you can do is if you're doing like a bunch of onions, you can put a little desk fan right over your cutting board and blow the fumes away from you. That's another thing that is very successful for people. And then, oh, another big one is when you're chopping onions, if you're putting them right in a pan to cook them, turn the fan on and it's gonna suck those fumes up. And if you're not, and you're chopping them, let's say for, you know, say you're cooking for a wedding and it's 100 people and you gotta chop 20 pounds of onions, make sure you put the onions in a bowl and cover the bowl. So if you're chopping, if you have to chop 5 onions, chop one, throw it in the bowl and cover it, because that's gonna keep the gas from getting in your eyes. So there's a few things that you can do to keep yourself from crying, but putting an onion on top of your head does not help. All it does is get you used to crying. Putting a match in your mouth does not really help. I mean, it will keep you from smelling the onion as much, but it's not gonna keep the hydrogen sulfide from developing in your eyes. So those are the primary things that you can do.
That's great. So the next question is returning to the garden. So what pest should we be looking out for in our fall gardens?
You know what's so great is there's just not that many pests in the fall garden, which is so lovely. If any of you have been out there right now, oh my gosh, it's been great. You know, all of the things are basically like going back into the ground from the summer to, you know, kind of come back out for next year. There are some, on warm days, you'll see some like cabbage looper moths coming around. The pests you really have to watch out for right now are things like woodchucks, deer, things that are trying to fatten up for the winter. So more mammals than insects. Or, and this is also like a dry season for us. September, October is when we get the least rain. So things like, and it's cooler. So we're not getting the blights and the rusts and the things like that. So I would worry more primarily about little critters trying to fatten themselves up. We just had to bar one out of Briggs. I had to buy extra traps and everything. We never got him. He got the picture to leave, but telling you, I tried hard to get him. I had the apples and peanut butter and everything. So not too many pests, just the four-legged kinds.
That's great. We have a question going back to the onions, about storing onions. Should you refrigerate them even long term?
They'll last a lot longer if you do. Onions, because unless they're organic, if they're conventional onions, they've been irradiated, which don't worry, it's not radiation, like, you know, not ionizing radiation, but they've been radiated to prevent them from sprouting. All root crops are, you know, anything that's going to sprout like an onion, a potato, they've been kind of run by cobalt-60 to keep them from sprouting. So what you can do is keep them in the dark in a cool space, and they're going to last a lot longer. But if you put them in the fridge, especially on like a flour sack towel or like a paper towel in the dark in the refrigerator, they last even longer then. Just make sure they don't get moist. And as long as they're in, you know, they're not, make sure they're nice and firm and they're not starting to rot. Because I tell you, once you cut into an onion and you put it in your refrigerator, anything that has a high fat content is going to absorb the flavor of it. So if you've got a stick of butter, wrap it in plastic or put it in like a jar or something, even a butter dish, something with a top on it, like a plastic, or I prefer glass container with a silicone top, like a Pyrex or Anchor Hockey. There's a million brands out there. But just keep your fat containing stuff really well, you know, away from the air, because it'll absorb your garlic, your onions, the weird flavors from your ice maker in your refrigerator. You got to watch out for that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's how I would store them. And if you're going to store onions for the next day for service, raw onions, and you don't want them to taste funky, chop your onions, pack them down in a container, and put a wet squeezed out paper towel on top, and then wrap it, because that air space can actually oxidize your onions and make them taste not good. But if you press a wet napkin on top of it before you wrap it to make it airtight, you actually will keep the onions from oxidizing, and they'll taste a lot better. So.
Very interesting. Well, as usual, we have run out of time, but thank you so much for such a wonderfully interesting session this week, and we look forward to seeing everyone next week.